Hey sightseers, what if I told you that here in Wisconsin is one of America's most haunted towns? One of this town is also one of the strangest ever in its beginnings as to how it came to be. Would you dare go there? If you're up for that kind of adventure, stay tuned, because today I'm going to present to you St. Nazianz, Wisconsin's strangest, most haunted town. To kick things off, I thought I'd start out by showing you some of the aspects of this haunted town before digging into its history and sharing the stories behind why some people claim St. Nazianz is so haunted that it ranks up there with places like Salem, Massachusetts, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. As you can see, we've made it to St. Nazianz in time for all the really cool Halloween decorations to be on full display as we walk about, talking about why this town is one of the, if not the most haunted place in Wisconsin, along with being one of the most haunted places in America. However, as cool as it is to see all these displays, they've got nothing on the story I'm about to share. According to historical records, which you can find here inside the village office or inside the old Firehouse Museum, which is run by the St. Nazianz Area Historical Society, established in 1986. St. Nazianz got its start thanks to Father Ambrose Oschwald, a German Catholic priest. Now, Father Oschwald was no ordinary Catholic priest. In addition to being a fervent follower of Christ's teachings to love everyone and to help the poor and needy, Father Oschwald was also into healing and mysticism. It is said that early on he used plants and herbs to treat illnesses, but later he claimed that people could be restored to health through fervent prayer, laying on of hands, and exorcism. Of course, that didn't sit well with the Catholic Church leaders, especially since in 1843, Father Oschwald openly declared that he had healed 3,160 persons, attributing all that to the power of God. In one community, local doctors called him a quack and insisted on both a civil and church investigation. After careful inquiry, Father Oschwald was deemed innocent. However, due to Father Oschwald's beliefs in mysticism that he could interpret dreams and visions and see into the future, he soon found himself in trouble once again. In 1849, he published a book called Mystique Schriften, pardon my German, but I believe that stands for mystical writings. In that book, Father Ambrose Oschwald predicted the second coming of Christ and also claimed that New Jerusalem would be established in southwestern Germany. Well, as you can imagine, that also did not sit well with the religious teachers of the Catholic Church. They called the book heretical and labeled it as a hodgepodge of nonsense. The third and final nail in the virtual coffin, if you will, to Father Oschwald's career as a German Catholic priest came in 1850 when he established a society known as Der Geestelijk Magnetische Verein. In other words, it was called the Spiritual Magnetic Society. Oh my, can you imagine the uproar that caused? The Archbishop was so upset by this and was concerned that Father Oschwald was going to start a cult, that he wrote a letter to each one of the churches within the diocese warning the parishioners of Father Oschwald's ideas, and then relieved Father Oschwald of his parish and restricted his priestly duties. Had Father Oschwald been any other type of man, he likely would have tucked his tail and went running from the priesthood. But not Father Oschwald. No. Instead, he went to Munich, Germany, where he enrolled in the university to study medicine. Then, according to historical accounts, in 1854 he returned to his hometown of Baden, Germany that is, where he approached the archdiocese with an idea. His plan? To emigrate to America, where he would go on to found what would become known as the village of St. Nazianz. According to historical accounts, in late May of 1854, Father Oschwald, along with 113 of his followers, set out for America. Initially arriving in New York, they journeyed on to Milwaukee, where Father Oschwald, taking their pooled resources, purchased 3,840 acres unseen of Manitowoc County land from a land speculator. Unbeknownst to them, however, this land speculator was hoping to cash in later on when they would run into financial difficulties. I realize I've been talking a lot about Father Oschwald. Bear with me, sightseers. His story is critical and may have some bearing as to why St. Nazianz is believed to be one of the most haunted places in Wisconsin and all of America. I was told that this house here, with the cross and Mother Mary below it, is actually the spot, the very spot, where Father Oschwald's followers first arrived. This is the very spot where they erected a cross, built a huge bonfire, and basically decided to build the town from this spot. They were going to set up a commune in which their members would live a life of quiet servitude to the Lord, which meant they would share in the workload, they would share in the food, they would share in the money. All the while taking care of the less fortunate, the poor, the hungry, the widowed, the orphaned. They didn't even bother to explore any of the land. They just walked in from right off there where the property line was, came in, set up their camp right there, and that's how St. Nazianz was born. It's interesting to note that before they even set foot on any of the land they purchased, they decided to name their community, their newly founded community, St. Nazianz, after St. Gregory of Nazianz, who apparently lived a life separating himself from others and served the Lord. According to what I was told, they didn't make any plans, they just started building. This location here, by the way, is where the very first version, the original St. Gregory Church, was built. We'll head to the second St. Gregory's Church that replaced it later on. As you can see from this sign, it was taken down in 1949 almost 100 years after it had been built. The other thing that people might find odd or really strange about St. Nazianz is that today there still is an honest-to-goodness monastery with Eastern Catholic monks living right here in town. According to the sign, they do welcome visitors, although today the time is starting to get a bit short, as you can tell from the position of the sun in the sky. Thus, I'm going to have to, I'm afraid, pass on that opportunity. But there's always another day. Other than the usual struggles that came along with picking everything up and moving to the wild, woolly west of Wisconsin, like severe winters, the threat of starvation, frequent and destructive wildfires, unexplained deaths, and, if I may add, the fear of not being able to make your mortgage payments because you bought your land from a shady land speculator. Life was great for those early settlers of St. Nazianz. It was so great that by the early 1870s, the community was actually thriving. The threat of losing their land to this unscrupulous land speculator had passed, thanks to the generosity of one German who did not live there, by the way, and the settlement, as it was known by the locals, had grown from the 70 that it started with to over 200 some people. And actually that number might be kind of light, because there was one researcher who, looking back over the records, found over 350 individuals associated with living at the settlement. Whatever the numbers, it appeared that Father Oschwald's small commune of people was doing well. That is, until February of 1873, when Father Oschwald took ill, likely from pneumonia. He never fully recuperated and ended up passing away on February 27th, 1873. This church, by the way, I believe is known as the former St. Ambrose Chapel. As you can see, it's no longer in use today. If I'm not mistaken, this is where Father Ambrose Oschwald was originally laid to rest, inside a vault inside the chapel. However, the cornerstone indicates 1898, which doesn't exactly line up with February of 1873, when Father Oschwald passed away. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and in all likelihood, that date on the cornerstone could actually be when the chapel was remodeled and enlarged into what you see here today. This is now where Father Oschwald's remains lie in rest, inside the vault at the bottom of the hill below the Loretta Chapel. It is said that while he lay dying, strange sounds could be heard throughout the town. Noises like cupboard doors slamming, things creaking and clanking. And this went on up until the point that he died. Everything stopped. But that's not the only strange thing to have occurred associated with the death of Father Oschwald. In fact, his right-hand man, Anton Stahl, wrote, "A number of times I have observed that he, with closed eyes, when there was no one else in the room but I alone, would extend his hands in blessing, and then with his hand signal someone away. And yet I saw no one in the room. That alone isn't too disturbing. So Father Oschwald saw people as he lay dying. If you've done any kind of research or digging into, read any stories about what happens to people, to us as we die, go through the process of dying, you'll come to find out that that is pretty commonplace for individuals on their deathbed to see people. However, what makes this tale take such a dark and twisted turn, one so dark and twisted that it likely sparked all the speculation, all the stories behind how St. Nazianz became one of, if not the most haunted place in Wisconsin and in America, is what happened to Father Ambrose Oschwald's body after he died. Now, according to one source I came across, reportedly a judge from Manitowoc County came to pay his respects to Father Oschwald after he had passed away. And this was like the day before his funeral. And supposedly, as the story goes, when he took a look at Father Oschwald, he warned the people of St. Nazianz to not bury him because he appeared to still be alive. Believe it or not, that's not all. The story gets even weirder. However, before I go any further, I have a couple of quick shout outs I want to give. First, I'd like to give a quick shout out of thanks to Sue, Mike, Belle, and Tater for once again being so generous as to tip our trip jar. Next, I'd like to give a quick shout out of thanks to those of you who've been so generous as to hit the super thanks here on YouTube. Last, but certainly not least, I'd like to give a quick shout out of thanks to Brian Beach for becoming our latest patron on Patreon. Thank you so much. We appreciate your generosity in helping us get out and share these interesting, fascinating stories about small towns here in Wisconsin and across America. By the way, for those of you who are wondering how you can help if you can't help financially, you can, if you're enjoying this video, boop, that like button and share it with your friends on social media. And now, getting back to the story of Father Oschwald, St. Nazianz priest, whose mystery still puzzles people to this day and likely is the source of why St. Nazianz is considered to be Wisconsin's most haunted village. As I was saying, this story gets even weirder, as if it wasn't already weird enough. But weird is right up our alley. Now, according to what I understand, they had decided to build a special crypt for Father Oschwald to lay his remains to rest. And that crypt would be inside the old St. Ambrose church, the one that was at the monastery. According to the story, on April 29th of 1873, they decided to open his coffin and take one last look before placing his remains in the crypt. Upon doing so, they discovered that his body, oddly, showed no signs of decay, not even any kind of smell, no odor, no nothing. The only thing that appeared to be out of place were his eyes. They were a bit sunken in. Otherwise, his skin looked just like it did the day he passed away. Talk about bizarre. And then Father Oschwald was laid to rest. Something else that makes St. Nazianz really odd compared to other towns, villages across America, besides the whole Father Oschwald story, is that there isn't a single lot here in town that's the same. That's right. Every single platted lot here in town is different. According to the town's historian, there isn't a single regular lot. Each lot here in town is considered irregular and unlike the other. When Father Oschwald and his followers first came here, they never made a plan to plat out the town or their commune. They just erected buildings willy-nilly. Thus, you'll find streets intersecting at points that really don't make any sense, and buildings or homes on lots that are small, perhaps, or maybe even the lot doesn't necessarily make sense when you look at it from a whole. If you recall, earlier I was talking about how they had created this commune and life was going so well for them. Upon Father Oschwald's death, chaos ensued. There were people within the commune that wanted out, and they wanted to get compensated for the work, the time, the money, the effort that they had put into building St. Nazianz. Well, long story short, because of the way that Father Oschwald had set it up legally, there were ramifications requiring extensive courtroom hours to unravel. And as a result, at some point in St. Nazianz history, property was turned over to another order or part of the Catholic Church. I believe at the point where we are in the story, it would be the Salvatorian brothers that now owned the monastery and St. Ambrose Catholic Church, which, if you recall, is where Father Oschwald's remains have been laid to rest. From what I understand, the Salvatorian brothers decided for whatever reason they wanted to do some remodeling. I don't know, maybe they thought Father Oschwald deserved a better place to be laid to rest. In any case, they built him a new mausoleum crypt and decided to move his body in the fall of 1926, October 4th to be exact. And much to everyone's surprise, now this is where the story gets really strange. After being placed in a coffin inside a crypt inside St. Ambrose Church, after 53 years, Father Oschwald's body, his corpse, looked relatively the same. Even local health officer Dr. L.W. Gregory was amazed by what he had seen. According to those who witnessed it, it would appear that Father Oschwald's remains refuse to return to dust. And you are all wondering how it is that St. Nazianz got the moniker of being Wisconsin's most haunted town. When you have a priest whose body just doesn't decay, what do you expect? In front of me is St. Gregory Church, which is also adjacent to St. Gregory's Cemetery. Built during the years of 1864 to 1868, this church is on the State Register of Historical Places and would have been built during the time that Father Oschwald was the leader of the St. Nazianz commune. Growing up where I did in Manitowoc County, it wasn't unusual to hear stories or rumors about St. Nazianz. Many times it involved stories about the nuns supposedly having children out of wedlock. Nothing that I ever heard, though, was as bizarre or strange as the story of what happened with Father Oschwald. And what's interesting is that some people speculate that because Father Oschwald, if you recall, was into the mysticism, that perhaps he was involved in maybe some darker arts, if you will, and that is why his body hasn't decayed. Then again, there are those who have the school of thought that perhaps Father Oschwald was really just a very godly man, and maybe that's why his remains haven't decayed. There is historical documentation to back this up. This isn't just something I'm pulling out of my you-know-what to whip out on YouTube. No, there is documentation that can be found. Not that I'm suggesting that anybody do this, but it would be interesting if his crypt were opened today to see exactly what level of decay is there. I have to say that this cemetery has to be one of the more fascinating or intriguing cemeteries that I have ever visited here in Wisconsin. Look at the different markers, how large some of them are, and how almost every single one of them has a cross associated with it. Whether it be engraved on the headstone itself or be the entire headstone. From the looks of it, this row here are all babies that have been buried, laid to rest here. Children who never lived beyond their first year. I wonder if some of the rumors or the stories that I heard about St. Nazianz over the years didn't stem from people just not understanding the roots of this community, its religious ties perhaps being viewed as fanatical or something to be fearful of. Then again, if you believe in things like heaven and hell, those stories might be considered what some would call the devil's work. Until next time.